In this mini lecture, I want to lay out the broad themes in this course on human physiology. Human physiology is a vast subject. It's a topic that fills libraries of material. Therefore, this course is intended to provide a basic literacy on the topic. We're focused on the mechanisms of physiology. And so throughout, if you compare these lectures to a textbook on human physiology, you'll find many fewer terms that are used. I try to avoid as much jargon as possible. We skip on consideration, for the most part, of pathologies, diseases. Instead, we're focused just on trying to have a really core, intuitive understanding for the big principles of how your body works. So this mini lecture focuses just on a couple of those core principles that we're going to build upon in lots of specific ways in the subsequent lectures. Now, the first point I want to make is that your body is amazing and it can do some really fantastically dynamic things, like leap across a ravine. In the context of a biological subject, you've learned in intro bio that living things have to perform certain tasks. They need to sense and respond to their environment. They need to reproduce. They need to generate energy. Okay, all the cells in your body have little power plants that convert one form of chemical energy into another. That conversion into metabolic fuel requires oxygen, and it produces CO2 and waste products. Now, in order for your cells to achieve these tasks, and in order for your body to achieve the larger aims of sensing, responding to the environment, reproducing, and so forth, those tasks are performed by organ systems. Our physiology is organized around organ systems, such as the cardiovascular system, respiratory system, digestive, urinary system. And so we can focus on organ systems in how they achieve these broad tasks. And that's a very short explanation of what this course is all about. Now, one point to keep in mind relative to the dynamic properties of physiology is that our body is organized in cells, and cells individually are very fragile things. They're composed of molecules, which are also very fragile. And that fragility is another major theme in physiology. So here, for example, we have a particular type of molecule that we're going, an enzyme, and we're going to track the activity or the performance of that enzyme based on the rate at which it reacts. So this could be, say, amylase in its breaking down of starches. And one major feature of enzymes is that they're temperature dependent in their performance. So if you were to make a series of measurements of the rate of reaction at a variety of temperatures, then you would get a curve that looks something like that. And what this shows us is that at the lower range of temperatures, you get greater performance as the temperature rises. And so this is the best spot to be on this graph if you want to, for example, in the case of amylase, break down the most starch. And at lower and lower temperatures, it's much less effective, to the point where you might as well not even have the enzyme at these very low temperatures because they're highly ineffective. So higher temperature is better. But you can take this too far. If you keep on going at higher and higher temperatures, not only do you have a cliff in terms of performance, this big drop off in the rate of reaction, but also if you then take these enzymes and put them down at a lower temperature again, what you would find is that they're unable to do this reaction any further. That's because they become denatured, which is essentially causing permanent damage to these enzymes. So as a consequence, enzymes need to be in a particular sweet spot. They're most effective right around your body temperature. And it's therefore in the interest of all the enzymes in your cells and all the cells in the body to maintain your temperature around that optimum. And if you go too high, then this is a danger zone. This is where your enzymes can begin to denature so that they can't perform their task any further. All right, so even though the body is dynamic, it can do lots of wonderful tasks very quickly in some cases, you need to bear in mind that molecules and cells are fragile. So physiology is about achieving dynamic changes while keeping your internal environment as constant as possible against these perturbations. So physiology facilitates action while protecting your cells so that they remain healthy. And this brings us to the concept of homeostasis, which is a constant internal state against these changes in environment and activity. Now, homeo means same, stasis means stays the same. So homeostasis is all about things staying constant. Now, as I've said, things are changing in your physiology. And as you become more active, as you change your environment, then the ability to maintain homeostasis becomes challenged. And so your organ systems have control built into them in order to stabilize the internal environment against those perturbations. And we tend to think of this capacity for homeostasis in the context of the body largely as if your body is just sort of a sack of saline that bathes cells. And that's what's represented here, is your body. Your body is this internal sac that has cells on the inside. Those cells metabolize chemical sources of energy. They produce CO2. They require oxygen. And in order for that oxygen to make it to the cells, and in order for the CO2 and waste products that are generated by the cells to get transported away from the cells, then we have a circulatory system. Okay, the cardiovascular system allows for this transport of molecules through the bulk flow of blood throughout the body. So you can begin to see how an organ system plays a critical role, but that critical role only works when it's integrated with other organ systems. For example, the respiratory system. The respiratory system provides an exchange of gases with the external environment. You inspire air into the body. The blood reaches equilibrium in terms of the dissolved oxygen that's in the blood, and the cardiovascular system offloads CO2 in the respiratory system so that when you exhale, you're getting rid of the CO2 from your body. What else? Well, I mentioned chemical energy. Of course, you eat food to provide chemical fuel for the body. So your digestive system not only absorbs the nutrients, but it breaks it down. And this is another exchange organ like the lungs. By the way, when I mentioned respiratory system, these are the lungs. And this is meant to represent the digestive system. In both cases, I've drawn them in white here because this interior space, you can think of that as being inside your body. But if you were to swallow a penny, which I don't recommend, then it would just travel through this white space and eventually you would poop it out and it would never get absorbed. And that's because this white space is essentially still part of the external environment. It's not until it's absorbed. And by absorbed, what I mean is that molecules need to traverse this membrane. This membrane is composed of epithelial cells that are all stitched together, and those cells are specialized for absorbing nutrients. Okay, it's only when the molecules make it on or across that epithelial membrane that it has truly entered the body. And once it's entered the body, then it can be picked up by the circulatory system and transported throughout the body. Okay, what other organ systems are important? Well, your blood accumulates waste products that your body wants to get rid of. And the way that it does that is it filters the blood and then allows you to pee out that waste. Okay, so these are the kidneys. The kidneys are constantly filtering the blood. The urine that is generated accumulates in the bladder, and then eventually you have control, fortunately, on getting rid of that urine when it's convenient. Reproduction is a fundamental property of living things, and we're going to talk about the sex organs and how they function as well. So these are the major organ systems that we're going to cover in this course. There are other organs like the liver that is actually really, really important, but we're going to consider the liver in its roles in supporting the digestive system and the energy balance of the body, and therefore you don't have dedicated lectures on the liver in this course. Okay, so how do we explain how physiology works? Okay, we have these things called organ systems. How do we consider the mechanisms that allow these organ systems to function? Well, to that, what we do, and biologists do this in general, is they look to lower levels of organization to understand how a particular level of organization functions. What do I mean by that? Well, I just mentioned organ systems. Okay, what's the definition? Well, it's a group of organs to perform a major task. And an example, the first example that we considered was the cardiovascular system. So the cardiovascular system has the heart and a network of blood vessels. So below this level of organ systems, we have those organs. The heart and the vessels are each considered organs. An organ is a functional unit of tissues. The heart functions to pump blood. Okay, that is its purpose. And it does that with a variety of tissue types. You've got, well, we'll consider some examples. So in the level below organs, we have tissues, which are aggregations of cells with related functions. So there we have cardiac muscle, which generates the tension, which in turn generates the pressures, which propel the blood through the heart. And you can keep doing this. Below the level of tissues, we of course have cells. So muscle fibers, the term fiber refers to the cells of muscles. And then when you tease out the different parts of those cells, in the case of muscles, there are some proteins that serve to generate the tension that those cells are capable of. And that's at the molecular level. So as I explain how organ systems work, I'm going to have to explain how the organs work. In turn, to understand the organs, we need to focus on the tissues. And for explaining how the tissues work, we consider the properties at the cellular and molecular levels. And this course actually begins with a focus on the different types of tissues. Those will be the first major lectures. And when I'm talking about tissues, I'm actually going to be mostly talking about cells and molecules. Then, once we have a foundation on understanding how the four different tissue types operate, then we're going to see how they are organized at the organ level on upwards, and how the organs function, such as the heart, and how they are controlled at the system level. So, we're going to consider dynamics of physiology. We're going to consider how homeostasis, a constant internal environment, is achieved. And as we consider different organ systems, we're going to move up and down in these levels of organization. Now, this being an introductory course means that we're going to focus on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals of physiology are surprisingly old. So I'm going to mention a bunch of what we call laws. There aren't many laws that are established anymore. It's sort of an old school term. But these are founding principles that were established by investigators a long time ago. So we have, for example, Robert Boyle, we have John Dalton, Adolf Fick, lots of old guys shown here in black and white photographs and paintings. And what you'll see here is that these are largely 19th century individuals This is Enlightenment era thinking to establish an understanding for the body that is purely mechanistic. So one point I want to make is that we're studying principles that are pretty long-standing, okay? This, again, is an introductory course. Now, I'm going to explain our understanding at the molecular and cellular levels, which is much more contemporary science that works in concert with the principles that are established by these guys. Another point I want to make here is that this science was established in Europe at a time when only aristocrats were empowered with the ability to conduct science. So these are a bunch of white guys who were wealthy. These days, scientists are much more diverse. And so I want to make this point because I don't want you to be dissuaded from becoming scientists or engaging with science just because it was a bunch of dead old white guys who established this in the first place. Okay, these are the only named scientists that I'm going to mention as we go through, just because they were the founders. These are the founding fathers of physiology. But today, physiologists are much more diverse. Now, we still have a long ways to go in terms of expanding career opportunities throughout the world and among a diversity of people, but increasingly so, cutting-edge research is conducted by a diversity of people. And so I wanted to point this out at the outset of the course. So although many of the founding principles of physiology were established by a narrow slice of society a long time ago, physiology matters to everyone, and a broad array of people are expanding our knowledge in this area today.